When I was starting out, I spent months watching YouTube trying to find the perfect video camera. And today, I have the pleasure of helping you find your camera. Finding a good beginner camera for video is all about getting the best value for your money and getting as close as possible to pro camera quality, but paying significantly less. So on this list, I have 4 cameras that cover everything a beginner needs. And it's more than just buzzwords like 4K video, slow motion, and 10-bit color. I made sure these cameras include all the important features that most beginners don't even know to look for. And I made sure to include cameras at different price levels and for different types of shooters. So let's find your new camera. Also, if you want to make sure you get the best pricing on any of the amazing cameras we talk about today, make sure to check out the links in the description down below. So if you're trying to get the best value for your money and you want a beginner camera that actually looks like a pro camera, the best value camera right now is the Canon R7, and I love this camera for 2 very specific reasons. One, it has a 32 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is actually one of the highest resolution sensors that you can get in this type of camera. And thanks to that sensor, you actually get way beyond 4K quality with this camera, but I'll explain how that works in a second. The other reason I love the R7 are the amazing Canon colors. You get these amazing, very true-to-life colors with a hint of warmth that make everything look beautiful, especially when it comes to faces and skin tones. And when it comes to having a good camera, you could have a low-resolution image, but if the colors don't look good, the image won't look good. And as a beginner, the Canon colors are going to be a huge help to you. So how exactly does the R7 get beyond 4K quality? When shooting 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second, the R7 actually takes the entire 32 megapixel 7K image area and squeezes it down into 4K. So the 4K video at 24 and 30 frames per second actually has the clarity of 7K. And the R7 also does 4K at 60 frames per second for 2x slow motion without a crop or any sort of compromise in quality, which is actually a pretty rare feature in a beginner camera. And it also does full HD at 120 frames per second for 5x slow motion. And I know we're mainly talking about video here, but it also shoots photos at 15 frames per second in mechanical shutter mode and 30 frames per second electronic shutter mode, which is incredible for even a pro camera. And you get all this in a beginner camera. And the R7 also has in-body stabilization for smooth handheld and camera movement, but it's actually not that great if you're using wide lenses and you actually get a little bit of corner warping. I recommend instead of using the in-body stabilization, get a stabilized Canon lens which has really good stabilization, and that's going to do a much better job for you. The R7 also has 10-bit color when shooting in HDR mode or C-Log3. This is going to give you a much more cinematic image, and it's also going to make it easier to color grade your video if you want to create something beautiful. The Canon R7 also has phenomenal autofocus and actually has one of the best subject tracking algorithms I've ever seen in an autofocusing system. It's actually the same autofocusing algorithm from the Canon R3, which is like a $6,000, $7,000 camera, so you're getting a really good autofocusing system here. The body of the R7 is really small and nimble, but with a really beefy grip, making it perfect for handheld work. The button layout itself is really well placed, it's ergonomically friendly, and the menus themselves are super simple to figure out. Canon, without a doubt, has the easiest cameras that you can just pick up and get great results with. Now, there is no fan on this camera, so it will eventually overheat, but that's only going to happen if you're recording really long clips that are 40 minutes plus, and most people don't really record clips that are that long. So as long as you're shooting 5 to 10 minute clips here and there, you should be just fine, even recording at the highest quality at 4K, downsampled from 7K or 4K 60. And it also has dual SD card slots, which you definitely need if you plan on doing any kind of professional work. The downside of the Canon R7 is that you can only use Canon branded lenses, and they actually don't allow third-party lens companies to make lenses for their camera. But that's okay, because they actually make some pretty affordable primes. I personally really like the Canon STM lineup. I really like the 50mm and the 35mm. The R7 also has a side articulating screen. Now, having a side articulating screen, not that big of a deal, but it's actually entirely touch sensitive, so you can control the entire camera just using the back screen, kind of like a smartphone. It's a really useful feature to have as a beginner that's still learning their camera. Overall, the Canon R7 has a high resolution sensor, great frame rate options, an ultra reliable autofocusing system, and 10-bit color, and I really wouldn't worry too much about the overheating. As a beginner, it's one of the best values for your money that you can get. But I also realized that a lot of beginners are on a very tight budget, and you probably don't want to spend on a camera, then a bunch of accessories, a microphone. You probably want a complete package in just one camera. In that case, the camera that I recommend is the Sony ZV-E10. It's a compact mirrorless camera with everything you need built right into the camera. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is incredible in low light. As a beginner, you're not always going to have the best lighting available, so to have a camera that's good in tricky lighting is definitely useful. And on top of that, the autofocus is phenomenal, and it actually has a dedicated autofocus unit inside of this camera. However, because it's a slightly older camera, it doesn't have anything fancy like subject detect, but the overall autofocus is really solid. The body of the ZV-E10 is designed to be both a travel and vlogging camera, but also a cinematic camera for more serious shooters. One thing that I love about the ZV-E10 is that it actually has a 3-capsule microphone built right into the camera, so you don't have to put an external microphone on top of this camera if you don't want to. It keeps your camera small and also your cost down. It also has only one button to flip between photo, video, and slow motion mode, making this a really simple camera to use, and it's going to be ideal for beginners. It also has a side articulating screen, however, it's not touch sensitive, but it's nice to have a side articulating screen. In video mode, it shoots at 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second. That is also downsampled from 6K, so you get 4K that really has the detail and clarity of 6K. And it also shoots slow motion in Full HD at 60 and 120 frames per second. The ZV-E10 does not have in-body stabilization, however, it does have digital stabilization for smooth handheld footage. Now, again, we're talking about video, but it also shoots photos at 10 frames per second in 14-bit RAW. I don't expect most people to try and create cinematic masterpieces with this camera, but this camera can do that. It has S-Log3 and cinema profiles built right into this camera, so if you ever decide to really color grade your videos and start creating music videos or commercials, you can absolutely do that because this camera does have that flexibility in terms of colors. However, it's only 8-bit color where more newer cameras have 10-bit color. But if you are someone that absolutely needs 10-bit color because you're serious about your video color grading, I actually recommend the Canon R50, which does have 10-bit color, but also HDR mode for added dynamic range. It is more of a hybrid photo camera, so it's not ideal for video, but it is a really solid video camera, and I recommend it if you need 10-bit color. Either way, you cannot go wrong with either the Sony ZV-E10 or the Canon R50. They're both well-made, solid cameras, and they're on a budget. Now, if you're like me and you like to shoot cinematic videos, or you simply want to make your videos look special compared to the thousands of videos on the internet, you want a camera that has a unique look to it. And the camera that I always recommend to everyone, for beginners especially, is the Fuji XS20. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which looks way better than any 24 megapixel sensor from Canon or Sony. And this is mainly because of the unique design in the Fuji X-Trans sensor, which actually gives you the quality of a full frame sensor, but in an APS-C body. And the Fuji XS20 actually has the same sensor from a pro line of cameras known as the Fuji X-H2S, which is a lot more. In video mode, the XS20 shoots 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second with no crop or compromise in quality, but it also shoots 6K in 3x4 mode, which is kind of a square format up to 30 frames per second. But best of all, it also shoots 2K up to 120 and 240 frames per second for slow motion. And it shoots all of these video modes in 10-bit color 422. Now, the reason I recommend the Fuji XS20 for something more cinematic isn't just because of resolution and frame rates, but rather the colors. It has Fujifilm emulations built right into this camera that actually give you a really pristine cinematic film-like look right in camera, and each of these cinematic looks can actually be tweaked to your liking, so you can create whatever kind of look you want. But if you really want to go bare bones and do your own color grading, you also have F-Log and Fuji Eterna profiles that you can use to really dial in your unique look. Now, when it comes to autofocus, it's really, really good. But if you've ever used a Canon or Sony camera, everything just kind of pales in comparison. So compared to Canon and Sony, I'd give it a 7.5, maybe an 8. The autofocus has eye tracking, face tracking, and it's really good with tracking subjects, just it's not Canon or Sony. I swear to God, I love Fuji cameras. Please don't be mad at me. When it comes to design, the Fuji XS20 is pretty vanilla. It looks like pretty much every other video camera on the market, but it is a solidly made camera and it is weather sealed. One thing that I do like is that they moved all of the major buttons for ISO, iris, menus to the top of the camera. So when you're on set, you simply have to look down at your camera instead of trying to get low, get behind it. Trust me, it's a whole thing. When you're on set, you'll appreciate that the buttons are on top. Now, as much as I love this camera, it will overheat on you. They actually make a cooling fan for it, which is not ideal, but I'm telling you the truth, this camera is very worth it, and that cooling fan is a small price to pay for that beautiful image quality. Overall, if you want a solid camera specifically made to give your content and videos a cinematic look to them, the Fuji XS10 is my personal favorite choice, and I also think it's the most beginner-friendly camera for a cinematic look. Now, what if you want a beginner camera that's an absolute powerhouse and comes very, very close to professional camera quality without spending professional camera money? The camera that I think does this the best is the Sony FX-30, and it's actually the little brother to the very popular cinema camera, the Sony FX-3. Plus, the FX-30 has one unique feature that no other camera on this list has, and that feature actually can make this a big boy, big project camera when you need the extra horsepower. The FX-30 has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, and when it comes to 4K video, it shoots in 4K, 24, 30, and 60 frames per second without any loss of quality, and the 4K 30 and 24 is also downsampled from a 26 megapixel APS-C size sensor. But best of all, it also has 4K at 120 frames per second, although it does have a pretty significant 1.6 times crop. However, no other camera on this list can shoot 4K 120. And on top of that, the FX-30 also has a dual native ISO of 800 and 2500, which actually makes this a really good low light camera. And it also has slow motion at full HD at 120 and 240 frames per second. And it does all of these video modes in 10-bit color at 422. And the FX-30 also has S-Log3 and S-Cinetone for more cinematic color grading. And the great thing about S-Log3 is now Sony actually has S-Log3 conversion LUTs on their website, but they also give you free creative LUTs from very popular creators that also use the Sony system, so you can get a cinematic look, kind of like the Fuji cameras, all right in camera. You can use their LUTs, download them onto your camera, and there you go. Now, there is one feature the FX-30 has that no other camera on this list has, and that's the ability to output ProRes RAW to an external recorder. Using an Atom Ninja, you can actually record 4.7K RAW up to 60 frames per second. The extra little bit of resolution from 4K to 4.7K is not going to make a difference. But using ProRes RAW, you're going to get more flexibility over your colors and light values and really get the ability to dial in the perfect image for those big projects that really need that extra bit of elbow grease. Now, you've probably heard this before, but the FX-30 has really good autofocus, 10 out of 10. The only thing that it's missing is that it doesn't have subject to tech mode like the newer Sony cameras, but other than that, super reliable autofocus. Now, the biggest selling point of the FX-30 for me is the Pro Style Cinema body, because it's made like a real professional camera. For one, it has a fan, so it's never going to overheat on you. And secondly, it has IBIS built into the camera for 5-axis stabilization and has no corner wobble. Third, you can also buy an XLR top handle for this camera. This gives you XLR audio right into your FX-30 for professional recording environments. But best of all of the dedicated buttons for white balance, ISO, iris, all of your major settings are actually on top of the camera, and it's a small quality of life improvement that you will definitely notice, and it's also on the Fuji XS20. And of course, it also has dual SD card slots, but also a full-sized HDMI port. And because the FX-30 has the Sony E-mount, it can accept lenses from not only Sony, but also third-party lenses, and you essentially have infinite lens choices. So if you're someone that's serious about their cinematic shooting, you're definitely going to want to go with the FX-30 because you're going to have more lens choices. But either way, you cannot go wrong with any of the cameras on this list today, so make sure to check out the links in the description down below for the best pricing on all of the cameras we talked about today, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.